To you from Seattle, Washington, in the U.S. Hello, everyone. Coming to you from Seattle, Washington, in the United States. Very happy to be able to talk to you. Of course, as I'm sure every speaker has said, I certainly wish I was there but we were all there together in person. We'll be talking about strategies for conversational product experiences. Um, and I happen to have a co-presenter. Alexa, introduce yourself.
I'm Alexa. I can answer your questions, play music, tell jokes, and more. To learn more, just ask, what can you do?
So there we have it. Now, unfortunately, and we'll talk about this a little bit, I'm going to have to mute my co-presenter so that she doesn't interrupt us until I want her to. And that's one of the challenges that I'm going to be addressing. So let's bring this up. Make sure I'm sharing my screen properly. Hopefully this is better. Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Good. Excellent. All right. All right. Let's try this again. All right. So we engage in a lot of conversation, not just the words we say to each other and the person-to-person conversations, but we send messages, we send emails. It's a lot of conversation. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to do all sorts of things. Get work done. We might have difficult conversations at work where we're maybe just spending time, filling time. There's a body of research that talks about conversation as simply avoiding silence. We negotiate, we relate to each other, we connect. This is the point. And for centuries, millennia now, language has been the human interface. Certainly, we converse with each other in exchange information with visuals and things like that. But all of this comes back to language and the representations we use of facts and objects and things by words, by saying things to each other. We're really good at it, despite the fact that some of us still, think about learning more about interacting better with people, and we read books like Crucial Conversations, and we get coached on speaking better. But the reality is that we're very, very good at it, and we can use language for all sorts of things, for a lot of very sensitive topics, a great amount of detail. We also can convey high level concepts, very abstract things, and we also talk about very small things. One of the key aspects of language is sharing language with each other is that we have this mutual responsibility that we expect of each other. When I engage with you in a conversation, there's certain things I expect you to do and think about, and there's certain things that you expect of me as well. Um, and so we have this idea that there is something we share and that we both have a role in it and we both have sort of rules that we need to follow in order for us to do this well and to enjoy it and to get something out of it. Now, turning to AI, just when we'll get to the similar things in AI, but let's talk a little bit about what it means to talk with AI right now. So you just heard Alexa a minute ago. Most of you probably have an iPhone and you've gotten used to Siri, or maybe you have an Android and you use Google Assistant. Samsung also has an assistant now called Bixby. There are many, many millions maybe of chatbots, and then there are all sorts of devices, things we wear, things that sit on our counter, things that are out of view. These can be dedicated things, or sometimes they can add on to an existing device or machine. And we use them for all sorts of things. We learn, we listen to music, we contact customer service. Um, Now, there's a couple of kinds of conversations we tend to have with AI. Uh, the first is called one shot, and this just basically means we ask a question and we get an answer. Alexa, what time is it here in Seattle?
The time is 7:13 a.m.
So
And I was wondering, did you have to try more than once to get my attention?
sometimes Alexa wants feedback.
Thanks for your feedback.
Perfect. The other kind of conversation that we have is multi-turn. So this is where we start a conversation and the application or device we're interacting with needs some follow-up information in order to fulfill our request. So things you can think of are making travel reservations. Simple, fairly straightforward things like that, where there's just some additional details that we don't usually include in our request, our initial request. Now, also you'll note that just because we're talking about conversation and language, it doesn't mean we're abandoning things that we can see, and in some cases, even things that we touch. So conversation is multimodal, and with people, it generally is as well. We show people pictures, we point to things, et cetera, et cetera. Now, just a little bit about what's going on here. Whether we have simple Q&A or brief tasks, a lot of what's offered today is functional. Some of it's engaging. There are games, there are entertainment type applications to it, but there's a lot of customer service. There's a lot of very simple things like finding out the weather or playing music, things that benefit us and we want, but aren't necessarily the fancy sorts of conversations that we think about in science fiction and stuff like that. Now, from a mechanical level, there's actually some pretty simple things going on here. We have something called a turn. I referred to that a minute ago. Basically, this is an input and an output pair. The input can be me making a request. The output is me getting an answer, or sometimes the output comes first and the device or application asks a question, and then I give input as the answer. The idea of an intent is what the system thinks the person wants. We'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. There's a very important concept about when we're building and creating these systems, how do we think about understanding what a person wants when they interact with it? When the person says something, we call that an utterance. Now, that's a word you're probably familiar with. We also talk about that in terms of text input when we're talking about a chatbot. So a little bit of expansion of the idea there away from just speech, but the idea is it's a name for the input. A prompt is the name for the output, whether that's a question or whether that's giving information. It's when the system says something to us or gives us a written response. Within utterances and prompts, we can think about the idea of entity, which is a variable detail, and we're all used to this in the mobile apps and web that we deal with. So it's dates, cities, or anything custom that you want to create. Now, a little bit more. AI is built on AI. Machine learning. Machine learning is one major branch of artificial intelligence, and that's used to create models of interpretation for the speech and the text. Both of them require, both text and voice require a lot of data. They require training, and the more or less the more data you have, the better things work. There, of course, are considerations about the quality of the data and how it's collected and things like that. And of course, there's all sorts of things around AI and bias and all that. We won't get into that today, but those are very important considerations when it comes to understanding how machine learning works. So, let's see. I'm seeing a raised hand, but I'll have to check on. Let me see if I can check on that. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing a control for that just yet. Well, let's. I'm really sorry. So uh, just to finish on this, the audio input when we're dealing with speech is converted to text through analyzing phonemes and the analog signal. Then that pattern that once it's converted to phonemes, it's then converted to text, and at that point, text and audio processing converge because the rest of the treatment will be with text. And text, of course, is then pattern matched against application or product domain, and it can include further rules. It's not all done with just machine learning. And then there can be additional system handling, whether we're sending things to a back end, to a database, and finding out answers, etc. And just a little bit more about intents. So, like I said, it's what the system thinks that the person wants. And so, what is happening here is that a person says something, and either the system takes the direct statement and treats that, and it happens to match one of the items in the machine learning data set, or there's an inference, and so we don't take the literal thing that the person said, and we instead take we match it to something that we think it means. Um, Sometimes that derivation is sort of shallow or narrow. Sometimes it's both of those things, but other times it can be quite significant. Here's an example of someone responding to this prompt here that talks about getting customer service for a problem in your home, and the person says, "I think I have a leak." Well, what this means in the context of that system is that they want to file a claim to get service, to get a service person out to come to their home and help them with that leak. So you can see that the intent we act on, file a claim, for which leak will be an input to, is derived from something that we know might be expressed as "I have a leak" or "my oven won't turn on." Okay, so let's talk about a couple of other examples real quick before we get into some of our strategies. Um, so Jeopardy is a TV show here in the United States. I assume that it's probably got some international versions too. It's very well loved. It's been on the air for a long time. And it wasn't until Alexa and the current state of voice recognition came along that Jeopardy felt like they could create an interactive version for home that felt just like the TV show. There's a mobile app, but it's multiple choice. And so that if you're not familiar with the TV show, the game is played by showing a clue and on a screen, and then the person has to answer that question in answer that clue or give what the clue is referring to in the form of a question. So if I say the city that the city that pointed towards outer space in the World's Fair in the 1950s, someone could say, "What is Seattle?" And so the question was about the Space Needle, and I would answer with that kind of response. And people did that naturally with their televisions. They loved to play the game like that, but they were talking into their living room. Now they can actually interact with Alexa and play that game. On the right-hand side, you have the Google Hub, which is meant to sit on your kitchen counter in a place where there's a lot of activity in a home. And so it brings familiar things together. A kitchen is a hub of activity, useful information like weather, travel, recipes. And then Google has some really well-defined guidelines about how those interactions happen in a multimodal way. And it just becomes a nice companion to the home, as long as you're familiar and comfortable with that technology. Now, let's talk a little bit about, I want to give you an example though of where sometimes things can maybe go not quite as we hoped. So, I am a big fan of comfort food. I grew up in Texas. There are things that I enjoy, and one of the things that I enjoy is just a simple piece of bread with butter on it. Um, Now, if you warm this up to a certain temperature, you can call it toast. But I'm going to invite my co-presenter to help me with this. Alexa, how do I make toast?
Okay, for toast, I recommend French toast honey toast. Serves too. What would you like?
No,
Start
Alexa,
recipe.
Alexa, I just want ordinary toast.
Okay, for ordinary toast, I recommend strawberry cheesecake French toast. 40 minutes to
No,
make.
Alexa,
What would you like?
Alexa, plain toast.
Okay, for HN toast, I recommend strawberry cheesecake French toast. 40 minutes to make.
Alexa,
What would you like?
cancel. So, not so easy. These are not the results I wanted. What I wanted is up there on the screen. Now, of course, I know how to make toast, and I don't need Alexa to tell me those instructions really. But you can imagine that if I was talking about other things that also were fairly simple, those sorts of answers about strawberry cheesecake toast, and earlier I got something about plain toast croutons. Um, None of those are going to satisfy me, and yet I'm thinking this is a pretty simple, straightforward request, and I'm not getting the help I need. Now, what's part of the challenge here? Part of the challenge is missing context. Um, and so let's talk about context a little bit and different meanings. So if I'm in a romantic relationship, and if my partner sends me a text that says I really need to see you, and it's got this emoji along with it, I get pretty excited, I get pretty happy, and I am looking forward to the time that I can be with my partner. On the other hand, if I were to get that same phrase without the emoji in an email from my manager, I might get a little nervous. I might think that a problem has occurred, or I might be worried about my job even. Um, and so the same words, but now the context has changed, and so the meaning that I draw from it has changed. Lastly, if I were to get these 6 words in a voicemail from my doctor, I might be really worried. I might be concerned for my health, or worse, and be thinking that my life is about to change. Now, context is hard, and as designers, our job here is difficult. We have to anticipate half of a conversation. We have to really aim for clarity of purpose. And ultimately, looking through these, the idea is that we need interactions or we have to design interactions with capabilities that exceed the complexities of the conversations that the system needs to have. In other words, there needs to be a support system around the core of the conversation so that we can handle things going wrong, or we can enable the AI system to help the person get somewhere, even though it may not be going as well as we would like it to. And so what I'm going to offer for the next few minutes are 5 strategies of ways to think about conversational AI and applying that to product experience. Um, and these are high level, of course. We don't have there's not a lot of time, and even in the workshop that I taught yesterday, there's much more detail and information to think about and practice as design professionals than we can include in just in 30 minutes or in a few hours. So, but I want to get you thinking about some of the important things here. So first of all, to reference Steve Krug, don't make me think you're thinking, I'm thinking what you're thinking. Now the idea here is that there's a lot of talk sometimes about, well, what we need to do is get people to understand what AI is capable of, or what these systems can do. And I'm just not a fan of that. I don't think it's should be a requirement for people to understand AI and how these systems work. Some will, some are curious about that. But when these systems are really serving us, it should be fairly natural, and we don't need to expect folks to understand what the rules and limitations of conversational systems are. They don't need to, they need to have certain expectations about what the system is and isn't aware of and have that work for them. Um, Many of us can't even describe how the internet works, and so it's important for us to consider that when we invite someone to have a conversation with a machine, we don't want the person to actually have to think very hard because that actually gets in the way of the communication. So, and there's just a ton of considerations about us as humans. And it's funny, we have these constraints, but we also have these amazing abilities around memory and distraction. We need things like predictability, naturalness, and familiarity. Once we have that, though, we can really go to the races. We're very flexible. At the same time, we're really good at fixing conversations that aren't going well. Um, and so as designers, we need to plan for all of these things. We need to be clear. We need to plan for misinterpretation. We need to plan for spontaneity. We need to be careful about open-ended types of things because those don't give a lot of guidance. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. One double click there is the idea of maintenance and repair. We do that all the time, almost every 90 seconds during the course of conversation. We make a little correction or we ask a clarifying question of our conversational companion. And these are really crucial things for us to figure out how to include in these systems. We can take some inspiration from people like Mr. Rogers. He was a long-running television show, had a long-running television show on public TV here in the United States, and he communicated directly to children most of the time, and he had very clear and simple, but very concrete rules about how to talk to children and get messages to them that are sometimes challenging. I've taken a stab, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I've taken a stab at turning those rules, the writing rules he had, into things to help us craft conversation. And what that can help us do is move through the considerations of how we ask questions. The first one here, how may I help you, is probably something you've heard or seen in many bots. It's too vague, it's too high level, it's too broad. Now, on the other hand, you may have encountered a system that sounds like the second example there. Very explicit, almost unnaturally so, very detailed, way more than I can remember or that I'm even interested in trying to listen to at one time if I'm hearing it or read. I might skip the whole thing. The third one starts to sound a little bit better. It's okay, but it isn't really that guiding and inviting. It's a little bit more focused on what are you calling about versus how may I help you with anything, which gets to the reason of the call, but it's still kind of fuzzy and big. Now, the last one we used in an actual system, and we saw performance really increase, and it was amazing. And the idea here is that it uses priming, psycholinguistic concept. We ask for just a few words about what's going on, so we invite them to say it naturally, or they can say something else that's not related to opening a service request. And again, with that service request, we're giving this hint that we have a goal. We're going to try to get you to it. So simple instruction, priming, and this kind of thing works a lot better. And you can see how different this is than the previous three examples. So the next principle we're going to talk about is the idea that we crave interaction with things that feel like people. And in fact, we crave that so much that we project qualities of people onto inanimate objects, even if they're not necessarily interactive. And we do that with our pets, and we do that with our computer systems. This is what we're trained to interact with from a very young age is things that either are other people or that act like other people. We're really good at this, and part of doing it is we share amazing amounts of knowledge and context, even when we don't know each other. This is why we're able to have a conference where I haven't met the vast majority of you. We rely on this to survive and thrive. Now, So when we are designing these systems, we can take a lot of inspiration from that to be a good machine, be a good person. Um, there are limits for attention, input duration, lifespans of interactions. We need help finding things sometimes. We need help knowing what's possible. We want repair, like I mentioned a minute ago, to keep the conversation going. Failing poorly is a conversation killer. People lose trust and they'll stop interacting. And again, to reinforce this idea that when we have things like repair and aid, what we're doing is creating a system that's more sophisticated than just the base functionality of the task. What does this look like in reality? Well, imagine going to coffee with a friend and sitting down at the table, and you both take your first sip, and one of you say, "The coffee's so good here," and your friend says, "Really is." And there's this moment of bonding, and you really, enjoy each other. Well, the thing is that makes that possible is this long list of shared knowledge and experiences, and we can't really have effective connections without understanding that these are there, even if they're not called to mind every moment that we're interacting. Um, Good conversations have these traits, that where we've got this shared knowledge, we've got predictability, we've got emotion, we get benefit from them. In addition, everyday language is every day. It's just stuff. This is something we use, and we use it very easily without a lot of thinking to it. But at the same time, it's not just unstructured mess. It's messy. But it's not an unstructured, tangle of nothing. It has a lot of meaning, and so we need to understand that um, that the that the everyday is where the power is in these interactions. We can use principles and guidelines to achieve these things. We tend to communicate very efficiently and with very similar characteristics across many cultures, and so understanding what the principles and the guidelines need to be is really important. Now, another big consideration is we deserve as people and even need to be treated with respect, care, thoughtfulness, even love in a certain way. And that means that AI needs to get to know us as people, as humans. And as we, as design professionals, UX professionals, technologists know, that's on us to accomplish. Um, we need to go out and do the investigation that we're good at. We know how to get to know people. Adam just talked about remote discovery. This is what we do. Is we find out what people need and how they need it, and we work to enable finding out the answers to questions like these, turning into designs that are effective. Now, one quick thing I want to point out is this is not about things like um, Siri and Alexa teaching our children to be rude just because they don't have to say please and thank you when they're asking for something. And it's not about us expecting to hear pleases and thank yous in response to us helping. This is an artificial level of respect where it has to do with politeness because you followed rules in your language. This is not about real respect where it's about, hey, I know what you needed. I'm going to help you get it in a way that you enjoy. All right. Lastly, or not lastly, sorry, second to last. Um, uh, Language is very primal for us. Sometimes you hear people say, well, that's not a word. Well, at some point in our history, no words were words. There were no words. Everything we do is about inventing language that's alive when we are talking. And you can hear this, if you've paid attention to language, it evolves. There are words that we didn't use 5 years ago. There are words that meant something different 50 years ago. There are words um, that we don't use anymore. And so we need to understand that language is a living tool. It's always adjusting. It's emergent in many places. This isn't about societal collapse or people being lazy. It's about the wonderful idea that language is a living mechanism that we use with each other. Um, And again, there's principles and guidelines around observe how we observe conversations that work well. This is a man named Grice who studied back in the 1950s, and he talked about what what did he observe in a good conversation. And to get there, we can ask ourselves questions about, does this sound like something that someone would say? Does it sound like um, something that a person would understand? And a lot of times, what we need to do when we're designing AI, is interact with each other as if we were the AI. When I talked about the toast earlier, a lot of in my workshops, I have groups do that, and where one of them acts as a person asking about toast, and the other acts as an AI system in trying to help them. And we talk about how that feels and how difficult it is to turn these very simple interactions that we think about into instruction and helpfulness. All right. Lastly, let's talk about the uncanny valley. Now, I'm talking about naturalness, familiarity, using the human elements, but I'm not talking about trying to fool people that these are systems or these are people, when they're actually systems and they're not humans. I'm really talking about um, uh, uh, being familiar, and making it easy to interact with, making it feel good and productive. Some of that comes down to craft. If you're familiar with this scene from a Star Wars movie, it felt very stilted, and we need the crafters, but we also need to be able to verify. We want to be able to look at principles, precedent, and proof. The idea that we know the good that we can do, and that's instantiated in the form of principles. We see what other people have done that's worked well, and we use that as precedent. And then we look at data, and we plan for data, and we evaluate and analyze that data to know if whether we're meeting the user needs and whether we need to improve our systems. And trust me, something always needs to be improved in these systems right now. So this is a set of things that you can think about, and some clues to some strategies and tools that you can use. And I hope that you enjoy, if you're exploring this for the first time or working with a team that does that, I hope you enjoy it and are able to find some success by using things like what I've presented here today. Thank you.